The Life of Saint Teresa is the spiritual autobiography of the 16th century Carmelite nun Teresa of Ávila, published just after her death in 1582, although it was written nearly 20 years earlier, and covers her life up to the age of 50. 2 years after finishing it, she recruited St. John of the Cross to her mission to restore the Carmelite order to its original spirit of poverty and humility. Teresa was born the daughter of a wealthy merchant in central Spain in 1515. Her parents were often at odds, and Teresa felt torn between them. When she was 7 years old, she persuaded her older brother to accompany her to the land of the Moors and begged them out of love of God to cut off our heads. But their uncle found them and brought them back. Teresa's mother died when she was 11, and Teresa became intensely devoted to the Virgin Mary. Nevertheless, she developed into a relatively normal teenager, headstrong, flirtatious, and concerned about her appearance, with the difference that she also believed herself to be a grave sinner. Her father sent her to a convent in an effort to improve her behaviour, and she became ill, partly as a result of that, partly because she thought she was so evil, and partly under the influence of a pious uncle. She became a nun. She was 20. What followed were 2 decades during which she inflicted penances on herself and was often very unwell. At one point she almost died, and when she recovered she learned that her attendants had dug a grave for her. She abandoned prayer, thinking she didn't deserve God's help. A priest persuaded her to begin again when she was 41, and although she found it difficult to begin with, it became easier and easier. In the life, she uses the metaphor of watering a garden to illustrate her progress and preach perseverance to other believers. The first stage is laborious, like continually filling a bucket from a deep well. The second is like a watermill, the third like a stream, the fourth like a deluge of rain. At this 4th stage, she began to experience spiritual ecstasies, which she describes in detail. Unfortunately, perhaps, she was surrounded by men of impeccable orthodoxy who took a keen interest in what was happening to her, and she came under pressure to censor or even condemn some of her own accounts. In chapter 25, we read, "There was a meeting of a number of people in whom I felt a great and justifiable confidence, and they all decided, as my confessor told me, that my experiences were of the devil," which is a recurring theme. She was probably correct to say that everyone involved had the best of intentions. From their point of view, church doctrine really was completely true. Any departure from it was diabolical. In any case, Catholicism in Spain was threatened from 2 sides, from the Moors and from the growing Protestant movement. Julian of Norwich might have been able to get away with setting down slightly heterodox revelations 150 years earlier, but Teresa was never going to be allowed that luxury. Gian Lorenzo Bernini's 17th century sculpture, The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, depicting a heavenly being aiming an arrow at the saint's heart, is probably the chief thing most people know about Saint Teresa. She describes the experience in chapter 29. "He was not tall, but short," she says, "and very beautiful," adding a little later, "of the type named cherubim." She writes in a chatty, intimate way, even as she comes across in places as a little severe. Of the gifts bestowed by God in chapter 21, she lists cultivating a detachment from our relatives and not desiring their company, but on the other hand, finding it wearisome unless they're much given to prayer. She habitually refers to God as His Majesty, which is obviously a development of Lord and was conventional for the time. In his introduction to the Penguin edition, J.M. Cohen explains a perennial appeal. Teresa's thoughts, he says, seem naturally to clothe themselves in simple, direct, and picturesque language. Even where she's describing a difficult state of conscience or a rare supernatural experience, she never fails to find the right homely expression, the simple, everyday metaphor, added to which she was no cold intellectual, but quickly became involved in the life and problems of anyone with whom she came into touch. Of course, she was also a product of her time. She believed strongly in hell and in the wickedness of Protestants. Given that, however, and how very different she was, even from people of her own era, it's remarkable how powerfully the life still speaks to us today. Try it. You'll see.